This one right here, Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy. That's probably the worst thing we have in this museum. A strange thing to say about a doll, but for the people standing in that room, it wasn't a joke. Some ran screaming down the road, desperate for help. Others questioned their sanity, wondering if what they saw was just imagination, until they realized they weren't alone. There were voices, shapes in the dark, and sometimes things that touched them. Tonight, we're opening a door that many believe should have stayed shut. Good evening, and welcome back to Devil Door. Tonight's episode is one I've been promising for over 2 years. If you've been with the channel for a while, you'll remember that the very first proper episode of the tape library focused on Annabelle. Since then, we've explored several cases connected to the same names that loom larger over the paranormal than almost anyone else. Ed and Lorraine Warren. You cannot talk about famous hauntings, possessions, or cursed objects without eventually running into them. They weren't just investigators, they became pop culture icons, shaping how the modern world understands demons, ghosts, and the idea of evil itself. But who were they, really? What this episode will cover. Tonight, we're diving deep into the demonic world of Ed and Lorraine Warren. We'll explore their origins as told through their books and interviews, lesser-known stories, including alleged connections to JFK, Bigfoot, and darker, more disturbing cases. And in the second half, the controversies, contradictions, and criticisms that have followed them for decades. This will be a balanced exploration. I'm not here to blindly believe everything they said, and I'm not here to dismiss them outright either. We're opening the door and looking inside. Before we begin, a quick warning. Much like the Seneca case we covered last episode, this story goes to some very dark places, particularly involving sexual violence and psychological trauma. If that's something you're sensitive to, chapters are available, and you may want to skip certain sections. That said, I'd like you to do something before we continue. Pause the video for just a moment, and leave a comment with your current thoughts on the Warrens. One word, one sentence, whatever feels it. We'll come back to this later. September 1926. A boy named Edward Warren Minnie was born in Connecticut. 4 months later, just a few blocks away, Lorraine Moran was born. Ed later claimed he wasn't especially religious as a child, even though he attended Catholic school. But something happened when he was 5 years old that, according to him, changed everything. He saw a ghost, an old woman, his neighbor, who had recently died. He would later describe seeing her emerge from a closet, watching him, silently accusing him of being in her home. When Ed ran to his father, a Connecticut state trooper, for comfort, he was shut down immediately. There's a logical explanation for everything. Don't talk about this again. But Ed didn't forget. In fact, he claimed he continued seeing things throughout his childhood, apparitions, shadows, movements that couldn't be explained. And what disturbed him most was that no adult ever wanted to hear about it. Lorraine's abilities. Lorraine's childhood was strange in a different way. She didn't see ghosts the way Ed claimed to, but she sensed things. She believed she could see the future, feel the past embedded in locations, pick up on events that had already happened or hadn't happened yet. The nuns who taught her didn't see this as a gift. They saw it as a problem. Ed and Lorraine met as teenagers in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Ed worked as an usher at a movie theater. Lorraine came often with her family, and on the very first night they walked home together, Lorraine later claimed something remarkable. She didn't see a 16-year-old boy crossing the street, she saw her husband. That night, she wrote in her diary, open quote, "Today I met the man I'm going to marry." Close quote. On his 17th birthday, Ed enlisted in the Navy. During World War II, the ship he was on was struck by an oil tanker and sank into the freezing North Atlantic, surrounded by fire, burning oil, and chaos. Ed believed he was going to die, and in that moment, he prayed. He later claimed that as he called out to the Virgin Mary, the flames parted, just enough for a lifeboat to reach him. 69 sailors survived. Ed was one of them. Shortly after, he returned home, married Lorraine, and they began a family. After the war, Ed worked as a school bus driver and painted on the side. But there was a twist. He painted houses, not just any houses, haunted houses. Ed and Lorraine would track down reports of hauntings, sketch the homes, and talk to the residents. The paintings opened the door, literally. People talked. Stories poured out. And slowly, quietly, the Warrens began building records. Artifacts followed. Eventually, so did their occult museum. At first, the Warrens talked mostly about ghosts, but as the 1970s arrived and America entered the era now known as the Satanic Panic, their focus changed. Ghosts became demons, hauntings became infestations, and Ed Warren began calling himself something very specific. Open quote, "I was born a demonologist," close quote. Not trained by the church, not certified, self-taught. The only one of his kind, according to him. The Warrens believed there were two kinds of entities. One, human spirits, ghosts of the dead, often confused, angry, or trapped. Two, inhuman spirits, entities that had never lived, never died, and never meant well. These inhuman spirits, they claimed, could pretend to be ghosts, manipulate human spirits, attach themselves to people, drive victims toward madness, violence, or worse. And this belief system would define everything that came next. There's a saying that Annabelle made the Warrens famous. That's not entirely true, but Annabelle changed everything, because after that case, the Warrens no longer just investigated the paranormal, they went to war with it. And this is where the story only gets darker. In the next chapter, we'll examine the cases that made the Warrens legends, the accusations that followed them, and whether the line between belief and exploitation was ever crossed. So before you go, look back at that comment you left earlier. By the end of this series, you may not feel the same way. Thank you for watching Devil Door. If you enjoyed this deep dive, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing your thoughts below. Until next time, keep the lights low and the door closed.